Coming up next is a fireside chat that you need to take your notepads out for. These two gentlemen are dropping some serious knowledge about surviving and thriving in a pandemic. As we all are having more alone time with our loved ones and family, we are finding out a lot about them and a lot about ourselves. Jeff Johnson is a familiar face to the Blueprint Summit family. He is a social architect and storyteller committed to Black men. Over the past 2 years, he's been a part of some of the most engaging and energetic sessions during the Blueprint Summit. Jeff has had a diverse career as a journalist, a producer, a TV host, as well as successfully running a strategic communication firm. BET audiences know him from various news and entertainment specials, as well as his show, The Man Cave. He intentionally is curating experiences for Black men. Our second guest, Kendrick Sampson, is best known for his role in the HBO Emmy-nominated show Insecure, where he plays the beloved character Nathan. His character thoughtfully pulls back the veil on mental health in the Black community. He is also the co-founder of BLD Power. His organization recently took their efforts to Hollywood agencies, studios, and other content creators, holding them accountable and challenging them to invest in Black communities with their Hollywood for Black Lives initiative. Welcome, Jeff Johnson and Kendrick Sampson.
What's up, you all? Welcome to the Blueprint. I'm Jeff Johnson, and I've got the incredible opportunity to talk to my brother, who, if you don't know him, I don't want you to be confused. Yes, he's an actor. Yes, you've seen him on TV. Yes, you've seen him on HBO. But this brother brings so much to our people. He's an answer to the prayer of the ancestors. He understands the necessity of organizing. He understands the necessity of infrastructure. And he understands the necessity of consistency. And so I am honored to be with you all today with my brother, Kendrick Sampson. What's up, man?
I appreciate that, man. Those are beautiful, kind words. I appreciate you, man, always.
No, but it's real. And I want to really just dive in with you right there. I mean, there's a lot of us who have been frustrated with what's going on all over the country for years, been a part of the rebellions that have happened in cities all over the world. But many of us have still relegated our engagement to a hashtag, because in some cases we haven't been trained, we haven't been engaged, we don't trust the organizations that are near us. And so I'm curious, what made you not just want to be involved as a participant in movement work, but to actually build infrastructure to impact movement work?
I've always felt the need to get to the root of the problem. So, whatever that was, a lot of people know that if you leave something broken on my desk or something like that, I've had people try to trick me into fixing things, because I gotta fix it. I gotta figure out what is at the root of the problem. And I started out working in homeless shelters and such, and I realized that this was like a philanthropy, more of a Band-Aid. And these Band-Aids and procedures are needed, right now, because there's so much injustice, to alleviate some of the symptoms, but it doesn't get to the root of the problem. And I was led to the grassroots movement after seeing that a lot of the roots of the problem were the criminalization of poverty, the criminalization of mental illness and substance abuse, and a lack of housing when we have the resources, right? Yep. But the resources are allocated towards oppressive institutions like policing and prisons and mass incarceration. And so I was led to the Black Lives Matter movement, and that was my introduction. Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, first chapter of BLM. That's where I got my introduction into grassroots activism and folks, liberators, radical dope people who had such love for their community that they were taking time out of their full-time jobs, right? These are bus drivers, professors, whatever, volunteering to organize the community for liberation.
Well, but I'm still curious, Kendrick, because I mean, Hollywood for Black Lives is not just about you being inspired by Black Lives Matter. Not only did you put this together, but I mean, when you talk about Mike De La Roche, when you talk about Tia, when you talk about Charles, when you talk about Renee, when you talk about Favani, I mean, like, you got some major real players that are serving as your board. And you and I both know that it doesn't always happen that way for every quote unquote celebrity that wants to be down, because activists can sometimes see through, not even so much that you're not serious, but that you don't have the capacity for what social justice work really is. And so I want to talk about a bunch of things, but I'm really interested in how Hollywood for Black Lives became a real organization, and what the goal is for you, 2020 or not.
Yeah, so I mean, in the same way that you were saying, people don't necessarily trust these organizations, right? I didn't necessarily trust BLM, you know, when I first met them. I had to develop that relationship just like they had to develop that relationship with me. And so, you know, when we're looking for how to utilize, and I believe that that's our purpose on this earth, is to utilize whatever privilege we can find in ourselves, whether that's male privilege, white privilege, right? You know, whatever it is, financial privilege, education, whatever it is.
Travel.
Yeah, whatever it is, utilize it for liberation, right? To uplift those who are more vulnerable, to make sure that they get to benefit from that same privilege, right? And more, that they get to thrive, that we all collectively liberate together. And that's what Build Power, the nonprofit that we co-founded, was built on. And was all of these relationships and trying to find mentorship within Hollywood and trying to build mentorship models in Hollywood because we couldn't find it. And then finally fundraising for it and streamlining it as a program. And then through that, we developed Hollywood for Black Lives in response to all of the defunding movement that was going around, Black Lives Matter and Movement for Black Lives, and what they were doing and inspiring all over the country. We saw, you know, schools dropping their contracts with police. We saw cities dismantling their police departments and starting fresh. We saw so many movements, schools defunding their school police and such. And we were like, what can Hollywood do? Because Hollywood has been a major player in perpetuating anti-Blackness, glorifying police violence and state violence as necessary, right? Painting it as necessary and good a lot of the time. And so since we are culpable in that, we called out Hollywood, and it was over, as you know, 300 Black professionals, prominent folks, beautiful, amazing, Charles King, and
yep.
Viola Davis, Kerry Washington, Issa Rae, so many amazing people, Tessa Thompson, all these folks came together. Chadwick Boseman, who, I'm not going to get emotional, but these are people that that contributed to trying to organize in this moment to answer and stand in solidarity with these movements, because they were fighting. They knew that they were fighting for our liberation, our future generations, our families' liberation, right?
And I want to talk to you about that a little bit too, because I think about where the NBA is. I think about where the NFL is. I think, hell, even right now, where college football is, because I've been so proud of these brothers. They actually led the NFL, if we're gonna be honest. But I'm not necessarily seeing the leagues and the business around the game shifting to the degree that the athletes have a level of visibility. And so when you think about that from a Hollywood sense, how you galvanize not only Black Hollywood, but those that are walking with Black Hollywood to be in a place where this superficial, you had the NFL talk about $250 million over 10 years for social justice. And if you look at 2018, the NFL distributed $253 million per team as part of their share of NFL revenue. So you're telling me over 10 years, you want to give us what you gave to every team as just part of the share for 1 year. And we're supposed to swoon over that. So how does our individual activism, as you see it, especially with Hollywood, translate into folks becoming partners, doing investment, as opposed to just elevated charity and philanthropy?
I think it's going to take, because a lot of people don't understand Hollywood is corporate, right? A lot of people don't understand kind of what you just outlined, and they see the displays of donation as action, and donation is not action, right? And usually the institutions that they're funding are the institutions they feel are safest for them to donate to, right? And so to make sure that they are not liable, or they don't feel, they don't get any backlash, or, you know, whatever it is, right? And so the way that we were organizing at Build Power and working with a coalition of folks at Color Change and Black Lives Matter, with Black Lives, all this, is developing a relationship, a strong relationship with the community and organizers and liberators, right? To understand and make sure that we are following the lead of those folks and what we're doing, because sometimes we do have a bubble, right? That whatever we're doing in the corporate space, whatever we're doing in the artistic space is informed by the liberation movement. And I think that's what corporate America needs to do. Organize, right? To make sure that they're organizing and not looking at liability and diversity and inclusion, but actually moving towards liberation. We don't want to just, diversity and inclusion is still faces, right? And certain experiences. It's not liberation. It's not becoming a part of the liberation movement. So I think that is most important, and the public has to continue to develop strong relationships with these community organizers so that we can see the BS, right? When corporations or whatever take these superficial stances.
But how have you been able to do that, right? 'Cause there's a couple of things going on that I'm somewhat baffled by. And, you know, I realize I'm old sometimes. So it's just like, all right, maybe Jeff, you just don't get it. But I've been seeing these memes that are like, you know, not my generation. That's kind of implying that this generation isn't taking what the older generation took. And so as I know you to be a student of activism. And so even as we think about evolving the liberation movement and ensuring that is fully owned by this generation, how do we do that without making unnecessary critiques that in some cases are disconnected from fact about the models of leadership and organizing and just straight gangster substantive engagement that a previous generation provided, even if the style was different?
Yeah. Man, I've been seeing some really impressive models come out of the youth, right? Young folks. I mean, even if you think of Black Lives Matter 5 years ago, 7 years ago, right? Opal and Patrice and them were in their 20s, right? Like Patrice and Alicia, and a lot of the young liberators that we see right now that came out of the Black Lives Matter movement, or even like Phil Agnew with Dream Defenders, these were all young people. Yeah. And it's the same thing in, you know, if we look back at Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Ida B. Wells and all these amazing liberators, Fannie Lou Hamer, we see pictures of them when they were older, right? But Claudette Colvin and some of these people that took these stands were teenagers, early 20s, right?
Fred Hampton was killed at 20.
Yeah.
So
was incredible and young. And I see a lot of young folks now taking hold. But I think, you know, you bring up a good point. I feel like there's a disconnect and a lot of the time and a lot of judgment, right? And a lot of shaming and a lot of like, you better do this and you, I can't believe you wouldn't, and blah, 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 as opposed to understanding and being empathetic towards the systems that are working how they're designed to work, to discourage us from being involved, to make us think that our efforts are in vain. They have been very effective.
And pitting us against each other in the process.
That's the whole purpose, right, of white supremacy, is to make sure that, you know, to pit gender against gender, and make sure that, like, if I'm fighting for my rights, that means I'm taking something away from you. Immigrant against, you know, people who are here, naturalized immigrants against undocumented immigrants. It's divisive to make sure that we do not coalition build and collectively liberate. There's so much judgment in it, and a lot of that judgment is based on standards of white supremacy, right? Like, oh, you don't speak the way that you are supposed to. We need to blend in and make sure that we speak the white man's language or the oppressor's language, and you don't fit that standard, or, you know,
or this notion that you have to have a degree in order to provide a certain level of leadership, or have been signed off on by one of these four people in order to, you know, I'm totally with you. What I've watched you do, though, which is, I think is really important for this moment, is I was looking at Meg Thee Stallion on SNL the other night, and when she broadcast Tamika's voice into a space that in many cases Tamika may not have been able to get to in that way on her own. There was a real kind of, for me, like this renaissance of remembering how many people got introduced to Farrakhan through PE, or Khalid Muhammad through Ice Cube, or all of this real connection of pop culture and activism. But I bring that up because I've watched you be open to following the leadership of women. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering why do you think that's important in this moment for us as men to fight some of the stuff that you just talked about, to be in a space where not only are we open to standing with our sisters, but in many cases directly following their leadership?
So I've been trying to truncate my answer. So I did that. It's a great question. I think you look at Ella Baker's model of group-centered leadership, right? And what we've been taught by a very white supremacist, patriarchal society or standard, right, is that there needs to be one leader, and the leader should be a man, and he, you know, look at an Ella Baker model of leadership. She talks about group-centered leadership. And Ella Baker was someone who didn't get the credit that she deserved for being a leader, for being a central part of the reason we know what civil rights and the effectiveness of the civil rights movement
is.
And
a master strategist.
And organizer and teacher. And she, when you look at that model of group-centered leadership, it's challenging what we've been taught by the colonizer, by the oppressor, that it has to be this white supremacist model of patriarchy and such, that there has to be a man, and the man has to be the leader, and they have to look a certain way and be strong and speak a certain way and not cry. And that's not how liberation works. Right? And that model was a large reason as to why there were so many difficulties, and it was easy to pick off leaders in the movement, right? That once that shiny example of leadership was taken out, then everybody is discouraged. As opposed to realizing the babysitter is a leader, the person who looks after the kids so that we can go out and march, the person who is strategizing behind the scenes, the tech person, you know, all of these different people have their leadership
But create some frame for me on that, because I think that there are a lot of people that even when they don't want to, brothers in particular, fall into that skewed narrative. And so if I don't have this gift, or I don't do this, or I don't have this title, then I can't be a leader. I got to get this or get this or get this. And what I hear you talking about is building a chessboard where every piece has value. But how did you figure out what piece you were and be comfortable with it and then evolve into another piece when it was the right time? Because I think there's a lot of brothers like, how do I know what piece I am? And how do I walk in that with a level of confidence?
I had to go in knowing that I didn't know everything. I had to go in and know that I had to learn and I had to listen. And the people that were always in the positions behind the scenes, teaching and organizing and strategizing and helping to understand and mentoring were Black women, cis, queer, trans, Black women, right? Behind the scenes, and started to be in front of the scenes. Even at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, they were not acknowledged.
Yeah.
Right? They were like, no way that this movement could be started by Black women. And in those spaces of listening, I understood who had the knowledge and I gained respect, right? And I went in knowing, since they were challenging things in me, right? At one point, somebody said, we don't need police and police don't keep us safe. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, that is not what I've been taught, right? And I had to deconstruct it. Well, what actually is safety? Oh, police only respond to crime. They don't actually prevent crime. They don't keep us safe. Interesting. I had to challenge myself and break down those things. And in that, I broke down a lot of the, not to make this much longer, but when you look at what abolition is, right? When you look at what Angela Davis is teaching and a lot of these folks, which is very simply, if you've gone to church, you done heard this, a bad seed produces a bad tree, produces bad fruit. A good seed produces a good tree, produces good fruit. So the concept of abolition is uproot those bad trees by the roots, resoil, and start with a good seed. For example, policing was started as slave catching. It's a reformed model of slave catching, right? There's a direct lineage. So it's always going to operate the way that it was intended to operate. You can color it and paint it up and however you want to, but that's what it's going to be at its core. Mm-hmm. And so uproot it and plant a seed that is founded in care, accountability, right? There's a difference between accountability and punishment. These are all concepts that I'm going to put out there as seeds and hope that people hear that, research it, and water it, and understand that internally, that concept of abolition as a framework for our activism has to be done internally. That there are seeds that were planted that were bad seeds that make us think that women can't be leaders.
Well, and it's almost like we are perpetually plugged into the matrix. And right. We're just reiterating what we've been fed, sometimes regardless of color. And right. and what I think is interesting is you're right. I mean, there is even another layer, because the slave catcher is one thing, but the 1880s is when the police departments were created. Chicago, Boston, New York. It's just interesting because even when you start talking about police departments and the 1880s, and Philly, New York, Chicago, Boston, those departments were created because they were part of protecting the assets of the wealthy from an undesirable underclass, freed slaves, Polish and Irish immigrants. And so to protect and serve was exactly what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to protect and serve the assets of the wealthy and monitor and control the masses. And so they are doing on a daily basis exactly what they were created to do. And so I think not only relearning that from your perspective, but then how are you reimagining and thus planting new seeds? And with that, as you think about this election, there's a lot of narrative around why vote, why not vote. I'm curious about why you vote and why you view it as one of the weapons in your arsenal.
Right. Well, one of them, so there was so much covered in that. So I was just thinking, that lineage of, slave patrols to protecting assets, and like even the way that people saw slaves was as property, right? And what that looks like and how they continue to operate, and understanding that, we have so many tools that we have to utilize. These systems are so deeply entrenched, not only in our physically in our society, but mentally, right? And there's so much work that needs to be done. So we have to utilize every tool at our disposal, every tool. And voting is one of those tools. Now, I have to always, Dr. Melina Abdullah always says, nobody ever voted their way to liberation. Nobody ever voted their way to freedom. So it's not the end all be all tactic, but these systems are still here. These systems are operating, they are well funded, and we need as many, the best way I could frame it is we need as many infiltrators as possible inside these systems. And we get those infiltrators in the systems by voting them in, by running strong campaigns to push against the status quo and put the leaders that we know will represent our values in those positions. Now, we don't always get those leaders and those choices, but we have to think strategically.
Well, and intentionally, because to your point, we need as many spooks to set by the door as possible, not just in the political space. But when you're talking about the work you're talking about doing with Hollywood, when we're talking about the NFL and the NBA, when we're talking about the vast, landscape of corporate America. And for those of you that haven't read Spook to Set by the Door, it's a book by Greenlee that was also turned into a movie that they ironically filmed in Gary, Indiana, because it was only one of two places with a Black mayor, about a fictitious first Black FBI agent who was trained in counterintelligence and explosives and hand-to-hand combat. And as opposed to infiltrating the Black nationalist organization, his community, he went back and trained them and popped off the revolution. And so you talked a lot about liberation and activism, but I'm also interested, now you got shot 7 times by rubber bullets. And I think about the compounded trauma that every day Black men are dealing with, let alone in 2020. And so what do you say to brothers about their mental health, about their wellness, about their strength? Because you don't get shot by 7 bullets, rubber bullets, and just come back out the next day like everything is good. And so what was some of the self-mastery and empowerment that you had to do for you to be in as strong a mental space to go back to war?
Well, let's be real. I'm still working through it. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm still working through being pulled out of my car, by police and told that they were going to kill me, right, when I was 16, 17, right? So there's, trauma that we're still working through from our parents that they didn't ever have the chance to work through. And we have, part of what keeps me going is being a part of the solution. Looking at how to build this infrastructure, what the vote means, and how to vote strategically, how to understand what's going on, what the purpose of protest is, what comes before and after the protest, what does liberation look like every day? And liberation every day also has to be applied to ourselves. So one thing that I think about constantly a mantra of mine is leave it better than you found it. Leave it better than you found it. Go in every situation, leave it better than you found it. In every conversation, leave that person better than you found them. But I wasn't applying it to myself for a long time. When you're the only person in the room, who are you working on liberating? Who are you leaving better than you found, right? It's not just about physical things and cleaning up. It's about yourself as well. And so I have breathing techniques. I have therapy once a week. And I know everyone can't necessarily afford that. So we put together a list of resources through Build Power. We have a mental health resources page for affordable access to affordable care while we're fighting for reparations and making sure that people have the mental health care infrastructure that they need for free, which they should. But until then, we are identifying the resources that people can use. But being mindful of our nutrition, of our fitness, exercise, making sure that we understand, don't let anti-Blackness fool you and say that you shouldn't get some sun. You need sun. We need sun. It's directly correlated to vitamin D and our happiness, right? Or our peace. But making sure that we participate in those things and put our ego to the side and understand that part of the movement, part of liberation is being well. Yeah. Making decisions with a clear mind. That's to be a really good leader. And I've been challenged on this lately because I'm prone to go. Capitalism teaches us we need to grind. And we're not, if we need to rest, we're not strong enough. We're not good enough.
Well, think about it. Even saying the grind is a false aspirational term, because the definition of grind is two things rubbing together until there's no more purpose in them. I don't want that to be my perpetual reality. If my grind doesn't quickly transition into a build, then all I'm doing is rubbing myself to death. And with that, 2020 has been hard on a number of levels. But there's also been a lot of grief for men. And I think about not only the insecurity of employment from COVID, the lack of real confidence about what the future is going to be. I think about the loss of legitimate cultural giants and icons. And so we saw it with Kobe in an unbelievable way. And we saw expressions of everybody from street cats to ball players. But then we got hit with it again with Chad. And so I'm curious, because I know a lot of brothers that never even said the word grief or loss in that context until Kobe and Chad. And I'm curious for you, as you think about even brothers what would you say to brothers who are watching now, who are navigating all kind of loss and grief and have always been told, suck it up, don't show emotion, be this lifeless, soulless beast, when the reality is there's so much strength in us giving into where we are. And so how have you done that? Not only around the loss of somebody like Chad, who is connected to your circle in an interesting way, but just with the loss of security and confidence and safety that's going on around you on a regular basis.
Well, there's so much that we have to, in continuation of that point of abolition, so many things that we have to deconstruct in ourselves and uproot. And one of those things is the notion of what a man is, right? Of not being able to be vulnerable and what strength is. So one of my old mentors told me, and I can't do it here, but he walked around the stage, right? I watched one of his talks, and he walks around the stage and he says, I get hit and I do this, I try to protect myself. And if I keep looking like that, I look weak, right? That looks weak. But if I get hit and I open back up, right? I know I suffered that hit and I have to heal, but I know I can take another one because I got through that last one. And that looks so much stronger, right? To open up and be more vulnerable, right? There is a strength in vulnerability, in continuing to open up and understand that you can get through this one because you got through the last one, right? And part of that process that you can't display in, well, I'm not gonna say you can't, but I don't know, I haven't figured out how to display physically the way that I just did vulnerability, is the healing aspect of it. And making sure that in that process of opening back up and saying, all right, I can take the next one, it has to be done collectively in community. You even think about in war, right? You have shooters and explosions and such, but you have cooks, you have lookouts, you have everybody, even within a unit, plays a role of making sure you can sleep while I keep a lookout, right? Because they know that they have to be as healthy as they possibly can, no matter what the circumstance is, because what you're taught in war is people die more so from starvation and so many other factors than getting shot. And so we have to make sure that we're taking care of each other, that we understand the need for collective liberation. We can't do it by ourselves. Don't let that ego and that manhood, that false definition of manhood make you think you have to do it by yourself and that you can't be vulnerable. You have to open up about these things so that they don't manifest in toxic, hate and hold on and things that block you. You should have this flow about you, right? So that you have you can make clear-minded decisions, but certain things will block you up from making those decisions to be the most effective leader that you can possibly be.
Well, and even pressure
is healing.
And even pressure cookers have valves, because at some point it will explode if you don't begin to let some of this out, man. But before I let you go, I'm curious about how you are currently navigating your own career. You talked a lot about the work that you're doing, the call that's on your life, how you're building, how you're learning, how you're treating yourself. But in this moment, has it changed for you how you look at how you show up, whether it's the roles you choose or how you invest your own resources in projects? What's kind of driving the next evolution for you as a content creator and an actor?
So another mentor of mine told me, money doesn't create your values or it exposes your values, right? And so you don't wait until you get rich to start doing, the whole give back model, right? Which is problematic, right? But it has to be ingrained in you. Your dollar is your vote. Everything you spend money on or time on, you're investing in something, and the responsibility in that snowballs. So if it's a problematic thing that you're investing time or money or whatever it is in, it's gonna get bigger and bigger. And so I decided through that advice to start very early in understanding what roles I'm picking and the effect that they will have, no matter how small they were. So this isn't a new thing that I've been very intentional. I've been in LA for 14 years. I turned down my first audition when I was 14, 15, because I thought it was a poor portrayal of Black children. Right? I thought that it perpetuated negative stereotypes and sexualized young Black girls in a way that I thought was bad. And, you know, thankfully I had a mom that supported that decision. But I know not everybody does necessarily have the right people around, but build up those values in how you spend your time and resources now, in whatever career path you're in, and make those decisions now. The most powerful thing that somebody else told me, the most powerful thing you could say in Hollywood is no. And I remember saying,
it's the most powerful thing you can say in a relationship. It's some brothers hurting right now because they didn't say no.
Amen. But yeah, you know, I remember telling my agents and such no a lot of the times, and a lot of them were white and didn't understand. They're like, you ain't got no money. What you mean no? And I'm like, I have to live with this. You don't, right? Like, my face is going to be out there forever representing this particular role or whatever. You are going to be the agent that made the decision, that made the deal. Your name ain't on it. Like, there ain't nothing that you have to deal with. But I have to understand morally what I'm contributing to. So I continue to operate in that vein, and understand what my actions mean. And, you know, and there's a fear, there's always been a fear of backlash with, you know, with getting out in the streets and saying what I say and doing what I do. But I also understand that I see the change that was made when people got out in the streets and started rebelling, right?
Yep.
And what that meant.
Yep.
And what that means to my nephews and nieces to see me doing that, right? To understand the example that needs to be set and the work that needs to be done. And I also know that my resume and my bank account don't go with me once I leave this earth. So there's something that is much more important of a legacy to leave, or not even a legacy, but liberation to leave, a world, an environment to leave where my future generations can thrive.
So no, man, listen, I really thank you for your time, but more than that, man, for Build Power and the work that you're doing. Please, you all, support Kendrick's work, because he's supporting our communities. Build Power is BLDPWR.com. Join the movement. And if it's not there, I think the beautiful thing that we're hearing from our brother is you can be part of the movement no matter where you are, no matter what you do, no matter how you do it, as long as the commitment of what you do is towards liberation. So, brother, I salute you, man. I thank you. And so glad that you came to lay out some of your blueprint.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much for having me, man. Always a pleasure.